issues. So far in the Romney campaign, we have seen a focus on debt, on taxes, on the future of spending, the size of government. But it seems that Democrats want to pick this fight. They want to pick a fight about the war on women based on the speakers they have coming to the DNC. As he mentioned earlier in the program, you have Planned Parenthood, you have other groups that are clearly combatants in this culture wars issue. Is it the case now that Republicans should look to this not as something that they want to deal with as a secondary issue to economics, but actually they need to tackle these issues head on? They need to actually give voice to what is in this platform, which members of the base view is the strongest conservative platform they've ever had. Should this be done, and is it a strategy for winning?
Well, I can tell you why it's being brought up. Because it moves the dial for those who probably would vote for Barack Obama, but are maybe a little bit disappointed with his handling of the economy. But this puts them over the edge. But for Republicans, the people who would have been moved by these were already going to vote for Romney. So I don't think it helps Republicans. It helps those who would be voting for Barack.
What about evangelical turnout, though? I mean,
there's
this theory that in 2008, because John McCain was viewed as not conservative enough, evangelicals didn't turn out. The truth of that, I think, is hard to prove, but there are a lot of people that make that claim. So there's a base turnout issue here. Do you see it that way? Do you think that this needs to be done?
Emily, I'd like an example of an election that's happened where moral issues, where cultural issues were the #1 issue for people, and it went against the Republicans.
Well, so I'm not going to go like year by year because there's so many different variables that play in.
Sure.
And we don't know which ones make the biggest difference. But what I can say is what we see in the data is that social conservatives are also, about half of them at least, are strongly motivated by economic issues. And they've seen what the Obama administration has done in power. They're very unhappy, and they're probably going to be voting for Mitt Romney. It's not,
Amy,
they're mobilized. They're mobilized.
What about, Amy, what about the people in the middle? What about the independents? What about those who are hearing these campaign ads about the war on women? They're saying that, you know, Mitt Romney's against contraception. He doesn't want it. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want women to have the right to choose. Shouldn't the Republican Party address that? I mean, don't they have to say, look, we have a clear stand here on social issues, even though Mitt Romney does not go as far on some of these issues as the platform does? Do they have to talk about it?
Well, back in the early 90s, Ben Wattenberg, an intellectual at the American Enterprise Institute, and I'm sure you know him, he wrote a book called Values Matter Most. And he's a Scoop Jackson Democrat. Some people would have said a neocon. Some people might have said in the Mickey Kaus mold of wanting to bring the Democratic Party back to the center. And when he said that values matter most, is that you need to put economic issues, or even some of these very discrete social issues, in a larger values framework. And he actually even got a phone call from Bill Clinton saying, I read that book cover to cover, it made so much sense to me. So when you talk about why do we want lower taxes, why do we want to put it in the framework of freedom, and even when it comes to traditional families, why do we want lower taxes and traditional families? Because if you have the breakdown of the family, then you have the expansion of government, you have welfare that puts people in a cycle of dependence, a cycle of poverty. We want to get people out of that cycle.
Do you want to help me with the social issues component here of this election right now, and how that actually factors into the election?
The thing that I think is interesting about this is, you know, in 2000, Karl Rove looked at the situation afterwards and complained about the number of evangelicals who stayed home because moral issues, he thought they hadn't emphasized them enough. So in 2004, they addressed the marriage issue over and over and over again in the national presidential election. It turned out that on the day that the exit polls were taken, moral issues were the #1 issue for voters.
Every state that's had gay marriage on the ballot has voted it down.
And here's the thing that's interesting about that: 80% of those voters who said that moral issues were their #1 issue were for Bush. Now, 4 years after that, and this is from Barna, which is a non-biased polling agency which concentrates on polling based on religion. Bush won born-again Christians, which make up 43% of the population, by 24 points. McCain only won them by 15 points. That makes a significant difference. A lot of those evangelicals either stayed home or they voted for Obama. And I think that it's important to, at some point in the campaign, get these things out there. What I would be more concerned about is whether we see us still having this conversation a month from now. I think it's good to have this conversation now, before a lot of undecided voters are paying attention, before people who are still sort of going back and forth.
Well, what about going on offense here? What about pointing out that Barack Obama is an extremist on the issue of abortion, based on his record before he was president, and has not ever walked away from that, voting down the Born Alive Infants Protection Act when he was a state senator in Illinois. Is that something that we should do, or is that just going to be too acrimonious? Are we only going to play defense, or are we going to point out the fact that not only does it matter war on women here?
But why? So which voters are you catering to?
Well, what I'm curious about
your base, and I think that there's also an argument to be made that people in the center, they have values too, and if you don't tackle these issues, the only values that they're going to be hearing about in the media and on TV are the Republican war on women. They want to end the right, for women to be able to do anything, basically. I mean, I think that there's a core issue.
But let's also remember in the abortion issue, for example, to Emily's point, it was Gallup had a poll in May that found that women are split evenly on the abortion issue. 44% considering themselves pro-choice, 46% considering themselves pro-life. So for those independent voters in the middle, I'm not necessarily sure that abortion is what's going to drive them at the polls. But getting back to my earlier point, you can connect values and economic issues in a way that isn't necessarily, deliberately hitting these hot buttons and gets those independents and undecideds.
Yeah.
I think that looks like you're ducking it, though. I think that there's a problem there.
I think we underestimate the way that these are going to matter in states that are this time around very different in terms of the swing state map than we might traditionally have. And I think that in states like Ohio, in states like Virginia, in North Carolina, and yes, in Florida, there are actually advantages to be gained by catering to specific populations that are there that might be more conservative on social issues than you might expect. And the only thing that I think that is really important here is, Amy, to your point, that we frame this as a values debate. And I think that Arthur Brooks and other people have highlighted the fact that that's the way that you need to learn to talk about economic issues. I don't think Romney's really learned to talk that way yet.
Right.
He's going to have to learn fast.
He's going to have to learn also that if he wants the base to turn out for him, which has always been a concern, and we believe that right now conservatives have gelled behind him, but if you want that to happen the first week in November, you need to be able to speak about these issues in a way that people really believe what you're saying and think you mean it. And I'm not sure he's necessarily